Devil's in the details. Have you heard that before? I think I lived that this week. The devil's in the details. Every time I tried to sit down to work on either the pastor's message or the sermon, I got a frantic email or text or a phone call from someone about something you all want to do at 1607 Lithia Pinecrest. Every single time. Then last night, as I prepared my sermon, I had been to Staples twice this week because they gave me the wrong print cartridge. And it was the second time the wrong print cartridge. So this is the sermon you won't hear. It's Super Bowl Sunday. You're probably happy anyway. In Mark, today's scripture passage is the very first time that we find Jesus in public ministry, with public witness, with people going out to proclaim, hey, you gotta hear this itinerant rabbi. He's something. He speaks with authority. He speaks with authority. David Luce, who also mentions the details are significant here, also says that in Mark, Jesus begins his public ministry with confrontation. That this is a scene of confrontation where he addresses whatever that is, the unclean spirit, and calls that spirit out. We don't use that language anymore. Unclean spirit. Really? Who has one of those? You do? You have one of those? Probably the rest of these people do too. They're just not raising their hands. Anybody have a demon? How many have more than one? We don't use that language so much, and yet we have demons. We have demons. Janet Hunt talks about some of hers. And she says that it makes sense to understand this first century experience as perhaps one of mental illness. That's what our scholars, our biblical scholars, have kind of come to. When you hear stories of possession or unclean spirits, they're thinking perhaps that that's what it was. And so she says that. And so she says, and I am grateful to say that has not been my own particular journey. Even so, I have known myself to be possessed by things which are less than God's intent for me. Possessed by things that are less than God's intent for me. What is God's intent? How many remember the Baltimore Catechism? To love and serve God here in this world, and to be happy with God in the next life. Do you remember that one? It's like the first question, or the first answer to the first question. Okay, so there's that piece, right? So if you're not of that background and you missed that, so now you've heard it. Okay? But truly, God didn't create any one of us to be miserable. God didn't say, let's see what I can do to each and every person here to make him or her broken. I'm going to break them in all unique ways. They're going to have all kinds of shards and sharp points about them, and they're going to go around and they're going to wound one another. That's what I'm hoping for. I don't think so. But there are things that we let into our minds, perhaps our hearts, that don't allow us to have what God did intend for us. And so Janet Hunt talks about some of hers. Here's what she's possessed by. My reliance on caffeine or sugar to give me a lift when I need them. caffeine or sugar? Anybody? Okay. A need to be in control.
Come on, Kathy.
Other TJs in the room. A fear of looking foolish. A fear of looking foolish. A need to be busy so as to be deemed of value. Old grudges which still sting when I turn my attention to them. What can we add to this list? Is there anything else that possesses us?
Envy.
Envy. Envy. I want a new car like Kim's new car. Or perhaps Heather's new car.
That's how too it happened.
Anything else? What else possesses us? Prejudice.
Fear.
Fear.
Judgment.
Judgment. What about one of my favorite demons? Worry.
Yes.
I have spent most of this week worrying that I won't sign this document the right way, that it won't get to this person, and it didn't. And I found that out Friday night after closing, after I had sent the document on Monday morning. Worry that what I'm supposedly in control of isn't happening. Because quite honestly, it's not. And I sat myself down more than once this week, worried, and tried to get centered. And tried to say, you know, let it go. I heard that voice, not in my head. It was coming from the kitchen. And it was said more than once this week. Some of us have our own little angels to balance the demons, you know. To be centered in the midst of all the craziness of our lives. And might I add, the caca. There's a lot of it, right? Alan says so. And he's the king, so he knows. That's not easy for me. I'm not sure how easy it is for any of us. And so, I went to music that helps me. And I listened to Be Not Afraid. And I listened to You Are Mine. And I listened to Here I Am, Lord. And I listened to You Raise Me Up. And I shared some of those with you this week. And while I was poking around, I came upon the story of a 16-year-old from Denver, Colorado. And I thought, oh, I wonder what this is. And Nadia Bowles-Weber had posted this. I don't know her. I don't even know how I found her. On Monday in my beloved neighborhood of Park Hill in Denver, a 16-year-old girl was shot and killed by police. Her name was Jess Hernandez. And this is a poem she wrote in a workshop at Art from Ashes. a nonprofit which empowers struggling youth by providing creative programs that facilitate health and hope through expression, connection, and transformation. The last part sounds like an ad, but you get the point. Okay? So I thought, well, I gotta read this poem. The title of the poem is, I seem to be, but really I am, and I choose to be. It's a pretty long title for her. I guess she was 15 when she wrote it. I seem to be, we could all do this exercise. I seem to be, fill in the blank, but really I am, fill in the blank, and I choose to be, fill in the blank. Here's the poem. I am kind and respectful. By the way, she was arrested on January 2nd for going 80 miles an hour in a stolen car. Others see me as a disrespectful teenager that just likes to get in trouble. But really, I am a kid that wants a good education. My parents see me as an irresponsible child, but really, I am taking care of other things. I don't want trouble. They see me as a mean kid with a lot of hate, but really, I like to be nice and loving. I seem to be a fighter, someone who doesn't like connections. It seems I don't want peace, but really, I am outgoing. I like to play sports. I want to get an education. I like to smell good and look nice. We all were there. Some of us haven't left that place. I consume by myself a bike and my own car once I get a good job. But really, I do want peace. Where there is no violence, I really don't want to fight. I would love to have connections with everybody without any trouble. I love having people around to get to know them. I choose to be kind to others I don't know. I choose to be loud at points. I choose to be happy, smiling all the time. I choose to be a good student, even if that doesn't get me friends. Remember that at 15? Remember that? I choose to be anything. And if it's a good thing that I know won't get me in trouble sometimes, I choose to be the big sister for all my younger siblings. She was the oldest of 6. I choose to be a good role model from now on, even if temptations are in the way. I choose to live a good teenage life, whatever that means. And I thought, I wonder what this kid's story is. So if you go to Good Search, put in Faith Family Night Church of Christ as the person getting your penny, and you look up Jessica Hernandez, January 26, 2014, shooting in the news, you'll find various accounts of what happened that night. There's a surprise. So the first one I went to was called, it was a website called Instigator, and I thought, oh, I wonder if this is son of Inquirer, but I don't know. And Instigator said, what's reported in the news is not what happened that night. What was reported in the news was that Jessica and 5 other teenagers were sitting in a car in a dark alley in Denver. It was a stolen car. And 2 police officers came up. This is according to CBS and the Denver Post. CBS more vague. The Denver Post, less vague, but interestingly one-sided, in my opinion. And according to those sources, the police shouted to the teenagers to get out of the car, and when they didn't, they walked over and they shot out the window on the driver's side, and there were multiple bullet wounds in Jessica Hernandez's body, which they then took from the car and handcuffed. No one else in the car was injured. The parents and a coalition of Hispanic folk in Denver, the ACLU, have asked for a larger investigation beyond the Denver police, because apparently there have been recently other shootings of people in cars that they thought were speeding away. What CBS reported was that the story of the, I'm not sure who the police officer was that spoke to the press, kept changing. And so first the story was that the police did not shoot at the car until one of the police officers was hit by the car, and then they shot at the car. And then the story was, well, one of the police officers during this experience, during this event, was struck by the car and broke his leg. And so at some point the ACLU got involved. And there are a request that there be a national inquiry on this event. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. The kids told a very different story than what you read in the Denver Chronicle. But here's what I think about this experience. I'm wondering if she would be somebody who would have been in this crowd in Capernaum in the temple, who might have been sitting there like this person with the unclean spirit, wondering, restless, possessed by thoughts from which maybe she didn't even know the source. The ACLU says she was young, she was Hispanic, and she was lesbian. I would wonder, how would the police know that? There's all kinds of questions to ask. But I wonder if she was somebody who was sitting in the crowd at Capernaum, what Jesus would have done. I believe that whatever happened that night, that child was not alone as she died. That somehow this God we know in our own brokenness was there with her. It's really something for me to have a week like I had that was so dysfunctional in me and around me, and I just, and that's nothing. That's nothing compared to someone who really needs to know that God does call out our demons. and is with us in those moments of those demons of ours being called out, whether they're minor, like a lack or need for control, or a need for caffeine, or a need not to look foolish. A need to be busy or to look busy or to be presumed to be busy. Or whether there's someone really struggling with what does it mean to be the person God created us to be? What does it mean to live the life that God intended for all of us? What does that mean? I know when I sat down and tried to get centered, that it was only in conversation with God that I got centered. I remember being 15 and 16 and wondering about life. Do you remember the horrors of being 15 and 16 and 17? I think the worst thing I did was take my father's Pall-Mall cigarette butts out of his ashtray, straighten them out, put a pin through them, and smoke them out in the woods somewhere. Pretty much wasn't going to get arrested for that. But my spiritual struggles were pretty strong. You know, the black and white world of my parents, there's an answer, there's a question, like the Baltimore Catechism said, was gone for us. And we had to work it all out ourselves. And there was a lot of, what did I say earlier, caca, for us to work out ourselves. And I did then the same thing I do now. I go to the center, what T.S. Eliot calls the still point of the turning world, where God is in every one of us. And quite honestly, I just tried to hang on for life some days. I just tried to hang on. It's like when you're forced to be the person, the adult, that has to go on the merry-go-round with the children, which just happened to me not that long ago. And I don't do well with up and down and round and round, trust me. And I'm holding on to that bar for life. But don't you remember that is a spiritual experience too? And if it's your spiritual experience this week, as it was mine in a very minor way compared to what other people's struggles are, just remember who's got hold of that bar, steadying you. And like this person in Capernaum, who somehow is drawn to Jesus despite his demons, maybe because of his demons, we are always and ever invited by this God of ours to forget about all the craziness around us and hold on. Because eventually, I timed it, 1 minute and 50 seconds later, the merry-go-round will stop. The spinning will stop. The up and down will stop. And it will do the same thing in our lives. It stops. But all through that experience, you want to know. All we have to do is perhaps voice this question that supposedly the demon and the man voiced. What do you have to do with me? And the answer that we get will not be the answer the demon got, which is, get out. The answer we get when we go to God with that question will be very different. Each of us is called. Each of us is chosen. Each of us is gifted by God in a unique way. Nobody else. Called, gifted, in that same way. And what I know, as hard as it is in those times, and I know some of you have had much more difficult times than I have, is that if we hang on, if we ask God, what is it you want? We will be given that answer. And our lives, despite all the hard stuff happening in them, will be made anew and fresh. And we'll see light where we didn't before. And maybe we'll go to nursing school. And maybe we'll go to grad school. And maybe we'll take a new job, and maybe we'll just find a way to serve somebody in a different way who shows up at our desk and wants our M&Ms. Is it M&Ms? Randy? Was it something else? Jelly beans? What was it? Remember? There was something on that person's desk.
Candy corn.
Candy corn.
That was
I'm just a few seasons behind. But all of us, whatever we do, we can let go of our own demons and have a hand free to do whatever it is we're called to do. I think that's really the message of this first public ministry of Jesus in Mark's passage. Yes, we have to hang on for the ride, and it's going to be wild and bumpy and crazy, just like it was for those first disciples. We don't know what's coming around the next corner. We really don't. But we trust it will be okay. And we trust in one another. We trust in one another in this congregation. That nobody's going to let anybody else fall off the merry-go-round. I really believe that. Aren't you glad I lost the first 2 pages?